The blood on Clara Morrison's hands was still warm when she stumbled into the clearing where the mountain man worked his knives against fresh trout, and she knew that if he turned her away, she would be dead by nightfall. She had been running for 3 days through the Colorado Rockies, her boots worn through at the heels, her dress torn by branches and brambles, her breath coming in ragged gasps that tore at her ribs. Behind her, somewhere in those endless pines, were the men who had killed her brother. They would kill her too, she knew, because she had seen their faces, had heard their plans, had witnessed the moment when they put a bullet through Thomas's chest for the crime of refusing to sell his mining claim. The mountain man looked up from his work, his hands stilling on the silver scales of the fish. He was massive, his shoulders broad enough to block out the afternoon sun, his arms thick with muscle that flexed beneath his rolled shirt sleeves. Dark hair fell past his collar, and his beard was trimmed close to his jaw. His eyes, she noticed even through her terror, were the color of spruce needles, deep green and watchful. "Please," she managed, the words scraping out of her throat like gravel. "They are coming. They killed my brother. They will kill me." He stood, and she realized he was even taller than she had thought, well over 6 feet, his frame built for survival in these mountains. He wiped his hands on a cloth tucked into his belt, his gaze moving past her to scan the tree line. When he looked back at her, his expression was unreadable. "How many?" His voice was low, roughened by solitude, but steady as bedrock. 5, maybe 6, I lost count." She swayed on her feet, and his hand shot out to steady her, his grip gentle despite the obvious strength in those fingers. "Come." He guided her toward a cabin she had not even noticed, so well did it blend into the landscape. It was built from logs hewn by hand, chinked with moss and mud, a stone chimney rising from one end. "Inside. Do not come out until I tell you." "What are you going to do?" She looked up at him, this stranger who had not yet asked her name, who had not questioned her story, who seemed to accept the danger she brought as simply another fact of mountain life. "What needs doing?" He opened the door, ushered her through. "There's a rifle above the mantel. Do you know how to use it?" She nodded, thinking of her father's lessons, years ago now, back when the world had made sense. "Good. If anyone comes through that door who is not me, shoot them." He closed the door between them, and she heard his footsteps moving away, calm and unhurried. Clara pressed her eye to a gap between the logs, watching as he returned to his workstation. He picked up the knife again, resumed gutting the fish he had caught, his movements methodical and practiced. He might have been alone on the mountain, unconcerned, simply a man completing his daily tasks. But she saw how he had positioned himself with clear sightlines to the forest, how his rifle now leaned against the work table within easy reach, how his body was angled to move quickly in any direction. They came 20 minutes later, crashing through the undergrowth with the confidence of men who expected no resistance. She counted 5 of them, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of those who had done violence and would do it again. The leader was a thin man with a pockmarked face and cruel eyes. She recognized him as the one who had laughed when Thomas fell. "You there?" he called out. "We are looking for a woman. Dark hair, green dress, about 20 years old. She came this way. You seen her?" The mountain man looked up from his work, considered the question as if it required deep thought. "No." "You sure about that?" The thin man stepped closer, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Because we tracked her right to this clearing. And if you are lying to us, that would be a problem. I have been here all day." The mountain man returned to his fish, drawing the blade along the belly with practiced ease. "Gutting fish, smoking meat, I have seen no one. Maybe we should take a look in that cabin." Another of the men spoke up, a heavy-set brute with a scar across his forehead. The mountain man's hands stopped moving. He set down the knife, very slowly, very deliberately. When he straightened to his full height, the change in him was palpable. He seemed to grow larger, more dangerous, like a grizzly rising to its hind legs. "No," he said, and the word carried the weight of finality. "You will not." The thin man's eyes narrowed. "That is not very neighborly of you." "I am not your neighbor." The mountain man's hand had moved, Clara noticed, closer to his rifle. "You are on my land, and I am telling you to leave." For a long moment, the two groups of men faced each other, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Clara's hand found the rifle above the mantel, her fingers closing around the stock, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Then the thin man smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "We will remember this. When we find her, and we will find her, we will remember that you stood in our way. You do that." The mountain man's voice had not changed, still that same low, steady rumble. "Now get off my land before I decide you are trespassing." They left, finally, melting back into the forest, with promises of return hanging in the air like smoke. Clara waited, barely breathing, until the mountain man appeared at the door. "They are gone," he said, "for now." She lowered the rifle, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Now that the immediate danger had passed, her body seemed to remember all the ways it was failing. Her legs buckled, and once again his hands were there to catch her, easing her into a chair by the cold fireplace. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "I do not remember. 2 days, maybe 3. He moved to the cabin's small kitchen area, and she watched as he sliced bread, cut cheese, poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. He set the plate in front of her, and she stared at it, something catching in her throat. "Eat," he said gently. "You are safe here. You do not even know my name." "Do I need to?" She picked up the bread, bit into it, and had to stop herself from weeping at the simple goodness of food in her belly. "Clara Morrison. My brother was Thomas Morrison. We had a claim up near Silver Creek. Good claim, producing well. Those men wanted it. Thomas refused to sell. So they killed him." The mountain man pulled another chair close, settled into it with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body. "I'm called Jacob Bridger. I've been in these mountains for 8 years now. I'm sorry about your brother." "They will come back." She took another bite, forced herself to eat slowly despite the gnawing hunger. "I have brought trouble to your door." "Trouble finds its own way to doors, whether you bring it or not." Jacob leaned back, his eyes on the window, always watching. "Those men are hired guns. I recognize the type. Someone sent them. A man named Cyrus Holt. He owns half of Silver Creek already, wants to own the other half. He makes offers, and when people refuse, things happen. Accidents, fires. Sometimes people just disappear." The bread turned to ash in her mouth as she remembered Thomas's face, the surprise in his eyes as he fell. "We were fools to think we could stand against him. You were brave to try." Jacob rose, moved to the fireplace, began building a fire with quick, efficient movements. "You will stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next. I cannot ask you to do that. You have already risked enough for a stranger." He looked at her over his shoulder, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not pity, but understanding. Recognition, perhaps, of one survivor seeing another. "I have been alone on this mountain for a long time, Miss Morrison. I know what it is to need help and have nowhere to turn. You will stay." Night fell over the mountains like a curtain, swift and complete. Jacob lit oil lamps that cast golden light across the cabin's interior, and Clara took in her surroundings properly for the first time. The space was small but meticulously kept. Shelves lined one wall, holding supplies and tools arranged with military precision. Furs and hides hung from pegs, testimony to successful hunts. A narrow bed occupied one corner, the blankets pulled tight and smooth. Everything spoke of a man who lived deliberately, who wasted nothing, who found purpose in the daily rituals of survival. He went back outside as the last light faded, and she watched through the window as he tended to the fish he had been cleaning, working by lantern light to finish the job he had started. He built up a fire in a smokehouse she had not noticed before, hung the fish and several rabbits on hooks inside, adjusted the flames and vents with the attention of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The smell of wood smoke and cooking meat drifted through the clearing, and despite everything, Clara's stomach growled again. When he came back in, his arms were full of firewood, which he stacked neatly beside the hearth. He washed his hands in a basin, dried them carefully, then began preparing a proper meal. She started to rise to offer help, but he waved her back to the chair. "Rest. You've been running for 3 days. Your body needs to recover." She watched as he worked, measuring out flour and lard, mixing biscuit dough with practiced hands. He had a pot hanging over the fire now, something bubbling inside that smelled of venison and herbs. The domesticity of it struck her as strange and wonderful, this massive man moving through his small kitchen with the confidence of someone who had learned to care for himself completely. "Did you always live alone?" she heard herself ask. No. He did not elaborate, and she did not push. Everyone in the West had a past they did not talk about. That was understood. The meal, when he finally served it, was better than she had any right to expect. Venison stew, thick with vegetables he must have grown himself, biscuits that were actually light and flaky, more of that good cheese. He filled her plate first, she noticed, heaping it full before taking anything for himself. He set it before her with a gentleness that seemed incongruous in such a large, rough man, and she felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness of the gesture. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, filled his own plate, sat across from her. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind in the pines outside. Clara felt warmth spreading through her body, not just from the food, but from the simple fact of safety, of four walls around her and a strong man between her and danger. "Tell me about your brother," Jacob said finally. So she did. She told him about Thomas, 5 years her senior, who had raised her after their parents died of influenza in St. Louis. She told him about the journey west in 1873, 2 years ago now, chasing the dream of gold and a fresh start. She told him about the backbreaking work of the claim, the moments of triumph when they struck a vein, the way Thomas would whoop and swing her around like she weighed nothing. She told him about the offer from Cyrus Holt, the threats that followed the refusal, the morning 3 days ago when the hired guns had come, and she had hidden in the root cellar while they murdered her only family. Jacob listened without interrupting, his green eyes steady on her face, and she had the sense that he was truly hearing her, not just waiting for his turn to speak. When she finished, her voice hoarse from talking, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I am sorry," he said simply. "That is wrong, what happened, and those men will answer for it." "How?" "There is no law up here, not really. The sheriff in Silver Creek is in Holt's pocket. Everyone knows it. Thomas and I knew it too, but we thought if we just kept our heads down, worked our claim, we would be left alone." She laughed bitterly. "We were wrong." "There is law," Jacob said quietly. "Maybe not the kind written in books or enforced by badges. But there is a law nonetheless. The law that says a man protects what is his and a wrong demands balancing. I know that law. I have lived by it for a long time." She looked at him, really looked, and saw the scars that marked him. A thin white line along his jaw, another disappearing into his hairline, the slightly crooked set of his nose as if it had been broken and healed without setting. This was not a man who had run from trouble. This was a man who had met it head on and survived. "Who were you before you came to the mountains?" she asked. "A soldier. I fought in the war, stayed in the army after, served out west at various forts. I saw things, did things that made me want to be far from other people for a while. So I came here, built this cabin, learned to live with the silence." He stood, began clearing the dishes. "But I am still that soldier, Miss Morrison. I still remember how to fight when fighting is called for." "Clara, please call me Clara." He smiled, the expression transforming his stern face into something warmer, almost boyish. "Clara, then. And you will call me Jacob, not Mr. Bridger or any such nonsense." She helped him clean up despite his protests, needing to do something with her hands to feel useful after days of helpless flight. They worked side by side in the small space, and she was conscious of his size, the way he seemed to fill the cabin with his presence. But it was not threatening. Instead, she felt protected, safer than she had in longer than she could remember. When the kitchen was clean, he pulled blankets and furs from a chest, began making a bed for her in front of the fire. She realized with a start what he was doing. "Where will you sleep?" she asked. "I will keep watch tonight. Those men may try to come back under cover of darkness. You cannot stay awake all night. You need rest too." "I have gone longer without sleep." He arranged the furs just so, creating a nest of softness and warmth. "Please, Clara, let me do this. Let me keep you safe." There was something in his voice, a plea beneath the stoic exterior, and she understood suddenly that he needed this as much as she did. Needed to protect someone, to have a purpose beyond simple survival. So she nodded, settled herself into the makeshift bed, and let him drape another blanket over her. "Sleep," he said softly. I will wake you if there is trouble. But there was no trouble that night. She woke once, in the deep hours before dawn, and saw him sitting by the window, his rifle across his knees, watching the forest with patient vigilance. The sight should have frightened her, a reminder of the danger that stalked them. Instead, she felt a profound sense of peace, and she drifted back to sleep with the knowledge that she was not alone. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. Clara opened her eyes to find Jacob crouched by the fire, tending a pot that burbled cheerfully. He looked tired, she thought, but alert, his movements still sure and steady despite the sleepless night. Good morning, she said, sitting up, finger-combing her tangled hair. Morning. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in days, thank you. She stood, folded the blankets, not wanting to be a burden. What happens now? He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed her one. Now we make a plan. Those men will be back, or others like them. You cannot run forever, and I will not send you back to Silver Creek to face Cyrus Holt alone. What choice do I have? I have no proof of what they did, no witnesses except myself, and who will believe me over Holt and his men? We make them believe. Jacob sipped his coffee, his eyes distant, calculating. Or we make it so they have no choice but to leave you alone. But first, I need to know everything about Holt, everything about his operation, his men, his weaknesses. So she told him, laying out everything Thomas had learned in 2 years of watching and listening. Holt owned the general store, the saloon, and half the mining claims in Silver Creek. He had a dozen men on his payroll, maybe more, all hard cases willing to do whatever he asked. He was smart, careful to keep his hands clean, always operating through intermediaries. The sheriff, Tom Warfield, looked the other way in exchange for a share of the profits. The few people who had tried to stand against Holt had either left town or ended up dead, their deaths always explainable as accidents or the result of their own carelessness. Jacob listened, asked questions, and she could see his military training in the way he approached the problem, treating it like a campaign to be planned and executed. By the time they finished talking, the sun was well up, and her stomach was growling again. I need to check the smokehouse, he said. Then I will make breakfast. You are welcome to come with me or stay inside if you prefer. She chose to come, unwilling to be parted from him even for the short walk across the clearing. Outside, the mountain morning was glorious, the air crisp and clean, the sky a blue so deep it hurt to look at. Jacob's cabin sat in a natural meadow surrounded by pines with a stream running along one edge. It was beautiful, she thought, and profoundly isolated. She could understand why he had chosen this place. He opened the smokehouse, and the smell that rolled out made her mouth water. The fish hung in neat rows, their flesh turning golden as the smoke worked its magic. The rabbits were darker, nearly ready. He adjusted the fire, added more wood, closed the door carefully. Another few hours, he said. Then we will have food for several days. I do not know how long you will need to stay, so it is good to prepare. Back inside, he made breakfast, and again she noticed the way he filled her plate first, setting it before her with that same careful gentleness. Eggs from chickens, she now realized, must be penned somewhere nearby. More biscuits, strips of bacon crisp and perfect. She ate with better appetite than she had shown in months, and she saw approval in his eyes as he watched her. The day passed in a strange sort of domesticity. Jacob had his routines, and he included her in them without fuss, as if she had always been there. He showed her the chicken coop hidden in the trees, the small garden plot where he grew vegetables, the root cellar dug into the hillside where he stored his supplies. He checked traps along the stream, finding 2 more rabbits, which he dispatched with quick efficiency before beginning the process of skinning and cleaning them. She watched him work, fascinated by the economy of his movements. He wasted nothing. Every part of the rabbit that could be used was saved, the meat for eating, the fur for warmth, even the bones set aside for making broth. He worked with the focus of someone for whom this was not a chore, but a meditation, a connection to the land that sustained him. "Can I help?" she asked. He glanced at her, considering. "Do you know how to scrape a hide?" "My father taught me a long time ago." He handed her a knife and one of the rabbit pelts, showed her where to work. She was rusty at first, but the skill came back, muscle memory guiding her hands. They worked in companionable silence, and she felt something settling in her chest, some knot of fear and grief loosening just a little. "I have not felt this calm in months," she said softly. "Even before Thomas died, there was always tension, always looking over our shoulder, waiting for Holt to make his next move. But here, even knowing those men are out there, I feel almost peaceful." "The mountains do that," Jacob said. "They remind you what matters: food, shelter, warmth. Everything else is just noise." "Is that why you stayed? After the war?" He was quiet for a long moment, his knife moving steadily along the hide. "I stayed because I was tired of taking orders, tired of fighting other people's battles. I wanted to be responsible only for myself, to live or die by my own choices. It seemed like a good idea at the time." "Does it still seem like a good idea?" "Sometimes. Other times I wonder if I was just running away, hiding from the world because I could not figure out how to live in it anymore." He looked at her and she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. "But then a woman stumbles into my clearing, bleeding and terrified, and I remember that isolation is not the same as peace. Sometimes the battles worth fighting are the ones that find you." Her throat felt tight. "I did not mean to disrupt your life." "You did not disrupt anything, Clara. You reminded me I'm still human, still capable of caring about something beyond my next meal. That is a gift, not a burden." They finished with the pelts, and he stretched them on frames to dry. The sun was past its zenith now, the afternoon stretching before them. Jacob went to check the smokehouse again, emerged with the rabbits, now perfectly smoked and ready to eat. He brought them inside, hung them from hooks in the rafters, then began preparing the midday meal. Again, he filled her plate first. Again, she felt that catch in her throat at the gesture, so simple and yet speaking to something deeper. This was not just hospitality. This was care, deliberate and consistent, the actions of a man who had decided she mattered to him. They ate, and she told him more about her life before Thomas's death, her mother's flower garden in St. Louis, her father's bookshop, the smell of leather and paper and ink, the way Thomas had promised her adventures when he proposed they head west, and how those adventures had been both harder and more wonderful than she had imagined. Jacob listened, asked questions, and slowly he began to share his own stories in return. He had been a scout for the army, he told her, working along the frontier during the Indian Wars. He had seen the worst of what men could do to each other, both white and native, and he had participated in things that still woke him in the night with the taste of shame in his mouth. When his enlistment ended in 1867, he'd taken his discharge and walked away from civilization, seeking something he still could not quite name. "Redemption, maybe," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "Or just forgetfulness. I am not sure I have found either, but I have found a kind of honesty up here. The mountains do not lie. They do not pretend to be something they are not. In winter they are brutal, in summer they are generous, but always they are exactly what they appear to be. I find that restful after years of dealing with people who smiled while sliding knives between ribs." "You are a good man, Jacob Bridger," Clara said quietly. "Whatever you did before, whoever you were, the man I see now is good, kind, worth knowing." He looked at her and she saw something shift in his expression, something warm and wondering. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you did not hesitate to help a stranger. I know you worked through the night to keep me safe. I know you gut fish and smoke meat all day, and then you set my plate first every evening, making sure I am fed before you take a bite for yourself. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He reached across the table, took her hand in his. His palm was calloused, rough from work, but his touch was gentle. "I am glad you found your way here, Clara Morrison. Even if the circumstances are terrible, I am glad." She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. "So am I." The afternoon drifted into evening, the light turning golden and then amber as the sun slid toward the peaks. Jacob went outside to tend his chores, and Clara stood at the window watching him. He moved through his routines with the same careful attention, checking the chickens, hauling water from the stream, splitting wood for the fire. His shirt stretched across his broad back as he swung the axe, muscles bunching and releasing with each strike, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks at the sight. She was attracted to him, she admitted to herself. It was too soon, too fast, too complicated given everything that had happened. But the heart did not consult the mind before making its decisions. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of the claim and the fear of Holt, with no one to share the burden. Thomas had been her brother, her best friend, but there were things she could not tell him, vulnerabilities she could not show. With Jacob somehow, she felt she could be entirely herself, scared and tired and grieving, and still somehow hopeful that there might be a path forward. He came in as darkness fell, his arms full of wood, and began building up the fire for the night. She helped him prepare dinner, moving around the cabin with increasing familiarity, learning where he kept things, falling into an easy rhythm with him. He had fresh trout tonight, caught from the stream that afternoon, and he fried them in a pan with butter and herbs while she sliced bread and set the table. When the food was ready, he filled her plate first, the gesture now familiar but no less meaningful. He set it before her with a small smile, and she smiled back, feeling something bright and warm expanding in her chest. "To new friends," he said, raising his cup of water. "To kindness in hard times," she replied, touching her cup to his. They ate, talking of small things now, leaving the heavy topics of death and danger for later. He asked about the books her father had sold, and she told him about her favorites, the adventure stories and romances that had filled her childhood imagination. He told her about the plants that grew in the high country, which ones were good for food and medicine, which ones would kill you if you were foolish enough to taste them. The conversation wandered and meandered, as comfortable as if they had known each other for years instead of barely a day. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and he pulled out a piece of wood and a knife, began whittling with idle expertise. Clara watched the shavings curl away from the blade, revealing the shape hidden in the wood, a bird taking flight. "That's beautiful," she said. "It passes the time." But she could see he was pleased by the compliment. "I will finish it for you if you like, a memento of your stay." "I would like that very much." The night deepened around them, and Clara found herself nodding off in her chair, the warmth and safety and sheer exhaustion finally catching up with her. She jerked awake to find Jacob covering her with a blanket, his touch feather light. "Sleep," he murmured. "I will keep watch again tonight." "You cannot go another night without rest. You will collapse." "I have gone longer, I promise. Please, Clara, let me do this." She wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her, dragging her down into sleep even as she tried to protest. The last thing she saw was Jacob settling into his chair by the window, rifle across his knees, his eyes on the darkness beyond the glass. She woke once in the night, and this time she spoke without thinking. "Jacob? I am here." His voice came soft from the darkness. "You are safe. Will you tell me a story? Something to chase the bad dreams away?" He was silent for a moment, then she heard him shift, his voice taking on the cadence of a man settling into memory. "When I was a boy in Virginia, before the war, my grandfather had a farm. It was not much, just a few acres and some livestock, but to me it was the whole world. He taught me to hunt and fish, to read the weather and the tracks animals left behind. He used to say that a man who knew the land would never go hungry, never be truly lost. I think about that sometimes up here, and I think he was right. The land provides, if you know how to listen to it." His voice washed over her deep and soothing, and she felt herself relaxing into sleep again, comforted by the knowledge that he was there, watchful and strong, standing between her and the darkness. Morning came again, the third day of her time on the mountain, and with it a sense of urgency that could not be denied. Jacob made breakfast, filled her plate first as always, but his expression was troubled. "We need to make a decision today," he said as they ate. "Those men will be searching wider now, asking questions in Silver Creek, maybe even bringing in more help. We cannot sit here and wait for them to find you again." "What are our options?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. "You can run. I can guide you to Denver, or further if need be. You could start over somewhere Holt's reach does not extend. That would mean giving up Thomas's claim, letting his death mean nothing. Or," Jacob continued, "we can go back to Silver Creek. We can find evidence, build a case, force the territorial authorities to act. It will be dangerous, but it might be the only way to truly end this." Clara set down her fork, her appetite gone. "If I run, Holt wins. He gets the claim, he gets away with murder, and he knows he can do it again to the next person who stands in his way. I cannot let that happen. Thomas deserves better. The other people Holt has hurt deserve better." I was hoping you would say that. Jacob smiled, fierce and approving. Because I have been thinking about this all night, and I have a plan. It is risky, and it will require you to be very brave, but I think it might work. Tell me. He laid it out for her, the strategy he had been developing in the dark hours of his watch. It was audacious, possibly insane, but it had a kind of elegant simplicity to it. They would not run from Holt's men. They would go to them. Clara would pretend to surrender, to be willing to sell the claim in exchange for her safety. Jacob would pose as her partner, a mountain man she had hired for protection after Thomas's death. They would get close to Holt, get him to incriminate himself, preferably in front of witnesses, and then they would take that evidence to the territorial marshal in Denver. It could work, Clara said slowly, or it could get us both killed. It could, Jacob agreed, but doing nothing guarantees that Holt wins. This way, at least we fight back. She looked at him, this man who owed her nothing, who could have turned her away or simply pointed her toward Denver and wished her luck. Instead, he was proposing to walk into danger at her side, to risk his life and his hard-won peace for a cause that was not even his own. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Truly?" He met her eyes, and she saw the truth there before he spoke it. "Because I spent 8 years hiding from the world, telling myself I did not care about anything beyond my own survival. And then you appeared, and I realized I was lying to myself. I do care. I care about justice and right and wrong, and I care about you, Clara Morrison. I care about what happens to you more than I have cared about anything in a very long time. So I am doing this because I cannot do anything else and still live with myself." Her heart was pounding, her breath short. "Jacob, I care about you too, more than I should after only 2 days, but I cannot ask you to die for me." "You are not asking. I am offering. There is a difference." He reached across the table, cupped her face in his hand. "Let me do this. Let me help you. Please." She leaned into his touch, closed her eyes, and made her decision. "All right, we go back to Silver Creek. We finish this." They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Jacob packed supplies, choosing weapons and provisions with military precision. He gave Clara one of his rifles, made her practice loading and firing it until he was satisfied she could handle it in an emergency. He cleaned and oiled his own weapons, checked his knives, transformed before her eyes from a peaceful mountain man into something harder, more dangerous. She watched him, and she thought about what he had told her of his past. He had been a soldier, a scout, a man who lived by violence. That part of him had never truly gone away, she realized. He had simply buried it under daily routines and isolation. Now, for her, he was digging it up, becoming once again the man he had tried to leave behind. "Are you sure?" she asked one last time. "Are you sure you want to do this?" He looked at her, and she saw no hesitation in his eyes. "I have never been more sure of anything." They left the cabin in the early afternoon, Jacob leading her down trails he knew by heart. He moved through the forest like a ghost, silent and swift, and she struggled to keep up with his pace, but he was patient, waiting when she needed to rest, helping her over the rough spots, his hand always there to steady her. As they descended toward Silver Creek, her dread grew. She was walking back into the lion's den, back to the place where her brother had been murdered, but Jacob's presence beside her gave her courage. He was so solid, so utterly capable, that she could almost believe they might succeed. They reached the outskirts of town as evening fell. Silver Creek was a ramshackle collection of buildings clinging to the sides of a gulch, born of silver strikes and sustained by the dreams of men who believed they would be the ones to get rich. It was a hard place, violent and loud, where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card, and men settled disputes with fists or guns, depending on how drunk they were. Jacob found them a room at a boarding house on the edge of town, one run by a widow who asked no questions as long as the money was good. He paid for a week in advance, told the widow they were business partners looking to establish a trapping operation in the area. The woman accepted the story without comment, showed them to a small room with a single bed and a window that looked out on the alley. When she was gone, Clara turned to Jacob. "There is only one bed." "I will sleep on the floor," he said immediately. "You take the bed. Jacob, we are supposed to be business partners. If anyone checks, if anyone asks, it will look suspicious if you are on the floor. We are both adults. We can share a bed without impropriety." He looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. "If you are sure." "I am sure. And frankly, after 2 nights of you staying awake on watch, you need real sleep. I will wake you if there is trouble." They went downstairs for dinner in the boarding house's common room, and Jacob filled Clara's plate first before taking anything for himself, the gesture so automatic now that he did not even seem aware of it. But the widow noticed, and she smiled. "It is good to see a man who knows how to treat a lady," she said to Clara. "Your husband is a gentleman." "Oh, we are not married," Clara said quickly, then realized her mistake as the widow's eyebrows rose. "That is, we are business partners, associates, nothing more." "Of course, dear." But the widow's tone suggested she did not believe a word of it, and Clara felt her face burning. Jacob, to his credit, said nothing, but she caught the slight curve of his mouth that might have been amusement. After dinner they returned to their room, and the awkwardness of the situation settled over them like a blanket. "I can truly sleep on the floor," Jacob offered. "Do not be ridiculous. Get into bed. We are both exhausted." She kicked off her boots, climbed under the covers still fully dressed. After a moment he did the same, keeping a careful distance between them. They lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the town outside, the raucous laughter from the saloon, the occasional gunshot, the barking of dogs. It was so different from the peaceful silence of the mountain, and Clara found herself longing for the cabin, the clearing, the sense of safety she had felt there. "Jacob," she whispered. "Yes?" "I'm frightened." "So am I." His admission surprised her. She had thought him fearless, this big, strong man who faced down hired guns without blinking. But of course he was frightened. Only a fool would not be. "What do we do tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow we go to the saloon. We let it be known that you are willing to negotiate. We draw Holt out. And then we see what happens." She rolled toward him, and in the darkness she found his hand, laced her fingers with his. "Whatever happens, I'm glad I met you. Even if this all goes wrong, I'm glad I had these days with you." His hand tightened on hers. "It will not go wrong. I will not let it. I promise you, Clara, I will keep you safe." "Who will keep you safe?" "You will. We will keep each other safe. That is how this works." She wanted to kiss him. The urge was sudden and overwhelming, to close the distance between them, to taste his lips, to feel the strength of his arms around her. But she did not. It was too soon, too complicated, too dangerous to let her heart run ahead of her head. So instead she simply held his hand, and eventually, held by him and holding him in return, she fell asleep. Morning came with harsh sunlight and the smell of bacon frying downstairs. They rose, dressed, avoided each other's eyes in the small space. Jacob went first to the washroom down the hall, came back with his hair wet and his face freshly shaved. He looked different, Clara thought, more civilized and somehow more dangerous for it. They ate breakfast in the common room, and again Jacob filled her plate first, earning another approving look from the widow. Then they stepped out into the muddy street, and Clara felt her stomach clench with fear. "Stay close to me," Jacob murmured. "Do not let anyone separate us." They walked through town, Clara very aware of the looks they drew. Strangers were always noticed in a place like Silver Creek, and she knew word would reach Cyrus Holt within the hour that she had returned. Sure enough, they had barely entered the saloon, barely ordered drinks at the bar, when the thin man with the pock-marked face appeared at their table. "Well, well," he said, his voice oily with false friendliness, "the little Morrison girl returns. And who is this you have brought with you?" "My name is Jacob Bridger," Jacob said calmly. "Miss Morrison hired me to provide security after the unfortunate death of her brother." "Unfortunate? Yes, that is one word for it." The thin man smiled, showing those yellowed teeth. "I think Mr. Holt would like to speak with Miss Morrison. He's been very concerned about her welfare." "I am sure he has." Clara kept her voice steady, channeling all the courage she could muster. "Please tell Mr. Holt that I am willing to discuss the terms of selling my brother's claim, but only if we meet in a public place with witnesses present." The thin man's eyes narrowed. "You are in no position to be making demands, girl." Jacob's hand moved to his belt, where his knife hung within easy reach. "The lady made a reasonable request. You can accommodate it, or you can go back to your boss empty-handed. Your choice." For a long moment, tension crackled between the two men. Then the thin man laughed, though there was no humor in it. Fine. Noon today, here in the saloon. Mr. Holt will be here, and you can have all the witnesses you want. But if this is some kind of trick, if you are thinking about going to the law, remember that the law in Silver Creek answers to Mr. Holt. Understood, Clara said. We will be here at noon. The thin man left, and Clara let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Jacob leaned close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Well done. Now we wait and we watch, and when he incriminates himself, we make sure everyone in this room hears it. The hours until noon crawled by. They stayed in the saloon, nursing drinks, watching the room fill up with miners and drifters and working girls. Word had spread that there was going to be a confrontation, and people gravitated toward the promise of drama the way moths flew to flame. At precisely noon, Cyrus Holt walked through the door. He was not what Clara had expected. She had built him up in her mind as a monster, something dark and twisted. But the man who approached their table was ordinary, even pleasant-looking, with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a good suit, carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Only his eyes gave him away, pale blue and cold as winter ice. "Miss Morrison," he said, inclining his head politely, "I'm so relieved to see you safe. When you disappeared after your brother's tragic accident, I feared the worst." "It was not an accident." Clara's voice rang clear in the suddenly quiet saloon. "Your men murdered Thomas because he would not sell his claim. I was there. I saw it happen." Holt's expression did not change, but something flickered in those cold eyes. "You are distraught, understandably. Grief can play tricks on the mind. I assure you I had nothing to do with your brother's death. It was a robbery gone wrong, a terrible tragedy, but sadly not uncommon in these parts." "Then why did your men chase me through the mountains for 3 days? Why did they track me to Mr. Bridger's cabin and threaten him when he would not give me up?" "I sent men to search for you because I was worried. As for threats, well, my men can be overzealous in their duties. If they frightened you or Mr. Bridger, I apologize." Holt spread his hands, the picture of reasonableness. "But let us not dwell on unpleasantness. You said you were willing to discuss selling the claim. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer." "How generous?" Jacob asked, speaking for the first time. $10,000. More than fair for a claim that has not been producing much of late. Clara felt anger surge through her. "Not producing much? Thomas and I pulled out $3,000 worth of silver just last month. That claim is worth 10 times what you are offering. Then, perhaps we can negotiate. But first, I need to know that you are willing to be reasonable, that you are not going to continue making wild accusations that could be very damaging to my reputation." "What if I am not willing to be reasonable? What if I go to the territorial marshal and tell him everything I saw?" Holt's smile remained fixed, but his voice dropped, taking on an edge like broken glass. "Then you would be making a very serious mistake. You have no proof, Miss Morrison, no witnesses except yourself, and a grieving sister's testimony is hardly reliable. Meanwhile, I have a dozen men who will swear that your brother was killed by unknown assailants, that I have been nothing but helpful in trying to find you and ensure your safety. Who do you think they will believe?" "They will believe a dying man's confession," Jacob said quietly. Holt turned to him, confusion crossing his face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that one of your men was injured in the attack on Thomas Morrison, injured badly enough that he did not make it far before he collapsed. I found him on the mountain 2 days before Miss Morrison arrived. He lived long enough to tell me everything, who hired him, who gave the orders, how much you paid to have Thomas Morrison killed." Jacob's voice was steady, matter of fact, and Clara realized with a start that he was lying, spinning a story so convincing that even she almost believed it. "He is dead now, but before he died, he wrote out a confession, signed it, and that confession is currently in the possession of a lawyer in Denver, with instructions to deliver it to the territorial marshal if anything happens to Miss Morrison or to me." Holt's face had gone pale. "You are bluffing." "Am I? Are you willing to bet your freedom on that? Because if you are not, then I suggest you make a much better offer for Miss Morrison's claim. $50,000. She signs over the deed, you never contact her again, and that confession stays buried. But if anything happens to her, if she so much as stubs her toe in a suspicious manner, that lawyer delivers the confession, and you hang for murder." The saloon had gone dead silent. Every eye was on Holt, watching him wrestle with the implications of Jacob's words. Clara held her breath, waiting, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether they walked out of here alive. Finally, Holt smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. $50,000. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Bridger, but very well. I will have the money and the papers drawn up by tomorrow. We will complete the transaction then." "No," Jacob said flatly. "We complete it now. You have a safe in your office. Everyone knows that. You can have the money here within the hour. Miss Morrison will sign the deed when she has the cash in hand, and we will do it right here in front of all these witnesses, so there is no confusion later about the terms." Holt's jaw clenched, but he nodded slowly. "Fine. Wait here. I will return shortly." He left, and the noise in the saloon resumed, though everyone was still watching Clara and Jacob with avid interest. Jacob leaned close, his lips nearly brushing her ear. "When we make the exchange, take the money and go straight to the bank. Deposit it in an account in your name only. Then we leave town immediately. Do not stop to pack. Do not say goodbye to anyone. We ride straight for Denver, and we do not look back." "What about the confession? There is no confession, is there?" "No, but Holt does not know that, and by the time he figures it out, we will be long gone. The money is real, and that is what matters. You will have enough to start over, and Holt will have his claim. He wins in a way, but you get out alive and with enough funds to build a new life. It feels like letting him get away with murder. It is. But sometimes surviving is more important than justice. Thomas would want you to live, Clara. That is what we are doing here, keeping you alive." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand that they find another way, but she knew he was right. They were outnumbered and outgunned in a town where Holt controlled everything. Taking the money and running was the only smart play. Holt returned within the hour, carrying a leather satchel that he set on the table with a heavy thud. He opened it, revealing stacks of bills bound with string. Clara's eyes widened. She had never seen so much money in one place. $50,000, as agreed, Holt said. "Count it if you like." Jacob did, his fingers moving through the bills with practiced speed. Finally, he nodded. "It is all here. Miss Morrison, if you would sign the deed." She took the pen Holt offered, her hand shaking only slightly, and signed her name across the bottom of the document that transferred Thomas's claim to Cyrus Holt. It felt like betrayal, like spitting on her brother's grave, but she forced herself to finish the signature. "Pleasure doing business with you," Holt said, his smile sharp as a blade. "I trust you will be leaving Silver Creek now. I would hate for there to be any further misunderstandings." "We will be gone within the hour," Jacob said. He stood, the satchel in his hand, and offered Clara his arm. "Come, we have preparations to make." They walked out of the saloon into the bright afternoon sunlight, and Clara felt eyes following them every step of the way. They went directly to the bank, as Jacob had instructed, and she opened an account, depositing all but a few $100s, which Jacob insisted she keep on her person for traveling expenses. Then they went to the livery, where Jacob purchased 2 horses and supplies with cash that Clara realized he must have brought from his cabin. He saddled the horses himself, checking every strap and buckle with meticulous care, and then they were riding out of Silver Creek, leaving behind the claim and the town and the grave where Thomas lay buried. Clara did not look back. She kept her eyes on the trail ahead, on Jacob's broad shoulders as he led the way, and she told herself that she had done the right thing. Thomas was dead, and no amount of vengeance would bring him back. She was alive, she had money enough to start over, and she had Jacob beside her. That had to be enough. They rode hard for Denver, stopping only when the horses needed rest. Jacob chose their campsites with care, always with clear sightlines and easy escape routes, and he kept watch through the night while Clara slept. She protested, insisted that she could take a turn, but he waved off her concerns. "I am used to it," he said, "and I will not sleep easy until we are well away from Holt's reach." On the 3rd day, they reached Denver, a real city with hotels and restaurants and people who did not know or care about Silver Creek or Cyrus Holt. Jacob got them rooms at a respectable hotel, 2 rooms this time, side by side but separate, and Clara felt a pang of something that might have been disappointment, as she realized they would not be sharing a bed tonight. They cleaned up, changed into fresh clothes purchased from a shop on the main street, and met in the hotel restaurant for dinner. Jacob ordered for them both, filling Clara's plate first when the food arrived, and she smiled at the familiar gesture. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide what you want to do with your new life. You have money. You have freedom. The world is open to you. And what about you? Will you go back to your cabin, back to your mountain?" He was quiet for a long moment, turning his fork over and over in his hand. "I do not know. I thought I wanted that solitude, that isolation. But these past days with you, I have remembered what it is to be part of something larger than myself. To care about someone, to be cared for in return. I'm not sure I can go back to being alone, not after this." Her heart was pounding. "Then do not go back. Stay. Stay with me. Clara, you do not owe me anything. You do not have to offer me anything out of gratitude or obligation." "This is not gratitude. This is me telling you that I care about you, Jacob Bridger, that I have cared about you since the moment you chose to protect me instead of turning me away, that I do not want to start my new life without you in it." She reached across the table, took his hand. "Stay. Please. Let us figure out what comes next together." He looked at her and she saw wonder and hope and fear all mixed together in his expression. "Are you sure? You barely know me. You do not know what kind of man I might be once the danger is past and real life sets in. I know you are kind. I know you are brave. I know you keep your promises and you fill my plate before your own and you carve birds from wood in the firelight. That is enough. The rest we can learn as we go. I am not an easy man, Clara. I have nightmares. I have demons that I have been running from for 8 years. I cannot promise you smooth waters. I am not asking for smooth waters. I am asking for you, for partnership, for someone who will stand beside me when things get hard, the way you have stood beside me these past days. Can you give me that?" He stood, came around the table, pulled her to her feet, and then, finally, he kissed her, his lips warm and gentle and tasting of coffee and promise. She melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him, the way he held her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I can give you that. I can give you everything I have for as long as you will have me. Then we have a deal, Jacob Bridger." They spent the next weeks in Denver, establishing themselves, building the foundation of a life together. Clara purchased a small house on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy but clean and well built with a garden plot and a view of the mountains. Jacob found work as a hunting guide, using his knowledge of the high country to lead wealthy Easterners on expeditions for elk and bear. The money was good, better than Clara had expected, and when combined with the interest from her banked funds, they found themselves comfortable for the first time in either of their lives. They courted properly and with all the conventional steps that Clara had missed during those intense days on the mountain. Jacob took her to dinners in the theater. They went for long walks through the city parks, talking about everything and nothing. He met the few friends she had made in Denver, and she met his former army contacts, men who spoke of him with respect and a certain wariness that told her he had been formidable in his soldiering days. And slowly, gradually, they learned each other. She learned that he did indeed have nightmares, that some nights he woke gasping and reaching for weapons that were not there. She learned to soothe him through those moments, to bring him back to the present with her touch and her voice. He learned that she had a sharp mind for business, that she could calculate figures in her head faster than most men could with pen and paper. He learned that she sang while she cooked, off-key but enthusiastic, and that she had a wicked sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh in ways he had not laughed in years. 6 months after they arrived in Denver, on a cool evening in October of 1875, Jacob asked her to marry him. He did it simply, without grand gestures or flowery speeches. They were in the garden of their house, harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost, and he simply stopped what he was doing, got down on one knee in the dirt, and said, "Clara Morrison, will you marry me?" She laughed and cried at the same time, pulled him to his feet, kissed him with all the love that had been building in her heart for months. Yes, yes, of course, yes. They were married a month later in a small church, with a handful of friends as witnesses. Clara wore a simple dress of blue cotton, and Jacob wore a new suit that made him look almost civilized, though she could still see the wildness in him, the mountain man beneath the respectable veneer. They spoke their vows with steady voices, promising to love and honor and protect each other, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. The wedding night was sweet and a little awkward, both of them nervous despite the months of courtship. But Jacob was patient and gentle, and Clara felt safe in his arms, loved in a way she had never quite experienced before. They learned each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts, with care and attention and growing confidence. Life settled into comfortable routines. Jacob continued his guide work, disappearing into the mountains for days at a time with his wealthy clients, always returning to her with gifts of fresh game and stories of the high country. Clara managed their finances, invested wisely, and began to build connections in Denver's business community. She found she had a talent for seeing opportunities others missed, and before long, she had purchased several properties that she rented out, creating a steady stream of income that complemented Jacob's earnings. They talked about children the way all young married couples do, but Clara did not conceive immediately, and she found she was not sorry. She wanted time alone with Jacob, time to build their foundation solid and strong before adding the complication of babies. He agreed, though she could see the longing in his eyes when they passed families on the street, the way he watched fathers with their children with something wistful in his expression. A year into their marriage, in the spring of 1876, they took a trip back into the mountains, not to Silver Creek, but to Jacob's cabin. He had maintained the property, hiring a local boy to check on it periodically, and now he wanted to show Clara the place that had been his home for so long. They rode up the familiar trails, and Clara felt memory stirring as she recognized landmarks from her desperate flight 2 years earlier. But this time there was no fear, only anticipation, and when they finally reached the clearing, she saw it with new eyes. The cabin looked smaller than she remembered, almost quaint in its rustic simplicity. Jacob opened the door, and the smell of pine and old smoke wafted out. Inside, everything was as he had left it, neat and orderly, waiting patiently for his return. "It is strange," he said, looking around. "I spent 8 years here, and now it feels like someone else's life. Like I am looking at the home of a man I used to know but do not quite remember being. Do you miss it? The solitude, the simplicity?" "Sometimes, but not enough to want to go back to it. Not when I have you." He pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "This place saved me when I needed saving. It gave me space to heal from the war, to figure out who I was when I was not following orders or fighting battles. But you gave me a reason to come back to the world. You gave me purpose beyond simple survival. I would not trade that for anything." They stayed at the cabin for a week, falling back into the rhythms that had sustained them during those first days. Jacob fished and hunted, gutting trout and smoking meat with the same careful attention he had always shown. And every evening, when the food was ready, he filled Clara's plate first, setting it before her with a tenderness that still made her throat tight even after all these months. "Why do you always do that?" she asked one night as they sat by the fire, bellies full and hearts content. "Fill my plate first, I mean." He considered the question, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. "My grandfather used to do that for my grandmother. Every meal, no matter what, she ate first. He said it was because she was precious, and precious things should be cared for first and best. When I came to this mountain, I forgot about that. I forgot about caring for anything beyond myself. But then you arrived, and I remembered. You reminded me that caring for someone else, putting their needs before your own, that is what makes us human. That is what gives life meaning. So I fill your plate first, because you are precious to me, Clara Bridger. Because taking care of you is the most important thing I do each day." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, and he reached out to wipe them away with his thumb. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. I love you too, more than I knew I could love anyone. You are my life now, Clara. You are my purpose and my home and my reason for being. Everything else is just details." They made love that night in front of the fire, on the same furs where she had slept during those first frightening days, and it felt like closing a circle, completing a journey that had begun with blood and terror, and ended with love and peace. When they returned to Denver, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly at first, missed monthly courses and morning nausea that she attributed to something she had eaten. But when the symptoms persisted, she sought out a doctor, and he confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She told Jacob that evening, over dinner at their table, watching his face as the news sank in. He went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide with wonder. "A baby?" he said, his voice rough. "We are going to have a baby? In about 7 months, if the doctor is correct. Are you happy?" He was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet, wrapping her in his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and thrilled, and so grateful I cannot find words. A baby. Our baby." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though the last months were uncomfortable as Clara's belly swelled and simple tasks became challenges. Jacob hovered, anxious and protective, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He took over all the heavy work around the house, refused to let her lift anything heavier than a teacup, and fretted endlessly about whether she was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking proper care of herself. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him, exasperated and charmed in equal measure. "I know, but you are carrying the most important thing in my world. Let me fuss. It makes me feel useful." Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1877, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Jacob stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement when she was sure she could not endure another moment. And when the baby finally arrived, slippery and squalling and perfect, Jacob wept openly, tears streaming down his face as the doctor placed the tiny bundle in Clara's arms. "He is beautiful," Jacob whispered, touching one finger to the baby's tiny hand, marveling when those miniature fingers curled around his. "He is perfect. You are perfect. How did we get so lucky?" They named him Thomas after Clara's brother, and Jacob held him while Clara slept, exhausted from the birth. When she woke, she found her husband sitting by the window, the baby cradled against his massive chest, sunlight streaming through the glass to illuminate them both. Jacob was singing, his deep voice soft and melodic, some old army song transformed into a lullaby. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Clara said, and he looked up, smiled at her with so much love it took her breath away. "I'm going to try. That is all any of us can do. Try our best and hope it is enough." Fatherhood transformed Jacob in ways Clara had not anticipated. He was still strong and protective, still carried the shadows of his past, but now there was a lightness to him, a joy that had been absent before. He doted on Thomas, spending hours simply watching the baby sleep, marveling at every coo and gurgle and tiny fist wave. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with intricate designs of mountains and trees and birds in flight. He sang lullabies and changed diapers and walked the floor during colicky nights without complaint. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Jacob taught him everything he knew. They went on long walks through Denver's parks, Jacob pointing out birds and plants, teaching Thomas the names of things. When Thomas was old enough, Jacob took him to the mountains, teaching him to fish and track and read the signs of weather and wildlife. Clara watched them together, her two men, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. 3 years after Thomas was born, their daughter arrived, a red-faced, loud-lunged girl they named Rose. Jacob fell in love with her instantly, this tiny, fierce creature who seemed to contain all the stubbornness and strength of both her parents. He was gentle with her in a way that surprised Clara, this big, rough mountain man cradling his daughter like she was made of spun glass, singing to her and rocking her and letting her fall asleep on his chest while he read or whittled. The years passed, measured in birthdays and holidays and small daily joys. Jacob's guide business thrived, and Clara's investments continued to pay off until they found themselves not just comfortable, but genuinely prosperous. They bought a larger house still on the outskirts of Denver, but with more land, enough for a real garden and chickens and even a few head of cattle. Jacob built a smokehouse behind the new house, and he fell back into his old routines when he was home from his guide trips. He fished in the streams that ran through their property, gutted the catch with practiced efficiency, hung them to smoke alongside rabbits and venison, and every evening, when dinner was ready, he filled Clara's plate first, setting it before her with the same tender care he had shown that very first night in his cabin. The children grew, and Clara saw pieces of both herself and Jacob in them. Thomas had his father's quiet strength and his love of the outdoors, spending every free moment exploring the property, coming home muddy and happy with pockets full of interesting rocks and bird feathers. Rose had her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubborn determination, a combination that led to more than a few battles of will as she insisted on doing everything her brother did, refusing to be limited by her gender or her smaller size. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Clara back to his mountain cabin. The children stayed with friends in Denver, and for a week it was just the two of them, alone in the high country where their love story had begun. The cabin was exactly as they had left it on their last visit, waiting patiently for their return. Jacob built up the fire while Clara unpacked their supplies, and then they stood together in the doorway, looking out at the clearing bathed in evening sunlight. "Do you remember the first time you saw this place?" Jacob asked, his arm around her waist. "I remember being terrified. I remember thinking I would die if you turned me away. I remember looking at you and seeing strength and safety and knowing somehow that you would protect me." She leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and leather and wood smoke. "Did you know then that I would change your life?" "I knew something was different the moment I saw you. You looked at me with so much hope and trust, even though I was a stranger. It humbled me, that trust. It made me want to be worthy of it. And then I got to know you, your courage and your kindness, and your stubborn refusal to give up even when things seemed hopeless, and I fell in love so fast and so completely that it took my breath away. I fell in love with you too, with the way you took care of me, the way you put my needs before your own, the way you gutted fish and smoked meat and then set my plate first every evening, making sure I was fed before you took a bite. I had never been cared for like that. It made me feel treasured, precious, like I mattered to someone in a way I had not mattered since my parents died." He turned her in his arms, cupped her face in his hands. "You matter to me more than anything in this world except our children. You are the reason I came down from this mountain, the reason I learned to live again, to love again, to be part of humanity instead of hiding from it. You saved me, Clara. You gave me a life worth living." "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "You protected me when I needed protection. I brought you back to the world when you needed to come back. That is what partners do. That is what love does." They spent that week reliving their early days together, fishing and hiking and talking for hours by the fire. Jacob showed Clara secret places he had discovered during his years of solitude, hidden meadows and crystal streams and views that stretched for miles across peaks and valleys. They made love under the stars and in the cabin, and once, memorably, in a hot spring Jacob knew about, the water warm and soothing around them as they moved together. On the last night before they had to return to Denver, to their children and their responsibilities and their comfortable domestic life, they sat by the fire in the cabin. Jacob was whittling, his hands moving with automatic skill as he shaped wood into something beautiful. Clara watched him, content and peaceful, thinking about how far they had come from that first desperate night. "No regrets?" Jacob asked without looking up from his work. "Not a single one. You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner. That we lost years when we could have been together, building this life. We found each other when we were meant to, not a moment before, not a moment after. I believe that." She reached out, stilled his hands, made him look at her. "I love you, Jacob Bridger. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. Thank you for taking me in when I had nowhere else to go. Thank you for protecting me and caring for me and teaching me what it means to be truly loved. Thank you for our children and our home and this beautiful life we have built together. Thank you for giving me a reason to live beyond simple survival. Thank you for loving me, despite my demons and my scars. Thank you for our family, for the joy you have brought into my life every single day since you stumbled into my clearing." He kissed her, soft and lingering, and Clara tasted salt on his lips, realized he was crying. I would do it all again, 100 times over, if it meant having you at the end of it. They went back to Denver the next morning, back to their children who greeted them with squeals of delight and stories of all the adventures they had experienced during their parents' absence. Life resumed its comfortable rhythms, the days blending into weeks and months and years. Thomas grew into a young man much like his father, tall and strong with a quiet confidence that drew people to him. He studied forestry, dreaming of working in the mountain parks, protecting and preserving the wild places his father had taught him to love. Rose grew into a force of nature, brilliant and opinionated, and utterly uninterested in the conventional expectations for young women of her era. She wanted to study business, to build empires, and Clara encouraged her, seeing in her daughter the ambition she herself had channeled into building their comfortable life. More children came, 2 more sons and another daughter, and the house rang with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Jacob continued his guide work into his 50s, finally retiring when his knees started to protest the long days in the saddle. He took up teaching instead, passing on his knowledge of the mountains and wilderness survival to a younger generation, and he was beloved by his students for his patience and his stories and his obvious deep love of the wild places. Clara's business ventures continued to thrive, and by the time she reached her 40s, she had built a small real estate empire that provided handsomely for their family and allowed them to be generous with others who needed help. She never forgot the desperate girl she had been, running for her life with nowhere to turn, and she made it her mission to help other women in difficult circumstances, providing housing and small business loans and advice to those trying to build new lives. They heard over the years news of Silver Creek. The town boomed for a while as the silver continued to flow, then slowly declined as the veins ran out and miners moved on to new strikes. Cyrus Holt died in 1889, shot by one of his own men in a dispute over money, and Clara felt nothing when she heard the news, not satisfaction or grief, just a kind of distant acknowledgement that the man who had killed her brother had met his own violent end. They never went back to Silver Creek. There was nothing there for them but ghosts and bad memories. Instead, they built new memories in Denver and in the mountains, creating a legacy of love and strength and family that would endure long after they were gone. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party, gathering friends and family from across Colorado to celebrate. Clara stood in their garden, watching Jacob laugh with their grandchildren, babies now from Thomas and Rose who had started families of their own, and she felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they had built together. Jacob caught her watching, excused himself from the children, came to her side. He was graying now, his hair shot through with silver, his face lined by sun and wind and years of laughter. But he was still her Jacob, still strong and protective and utterly devoted. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "About how far we have come. About that girl who stumbled into a clearing, terrified and alone, and the mountain man who took her in. About all the years since, all the joys and sorrows and ordinary moments that have made up our life together. I'm thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive to have found you." "I'm the lucky one," he countered. "You gave me everything, family, purpose, love, a reason to come down from the mountain and rejoin the human race. I would be long dead by now, I think, if you had not appeared in my life. Probably would have done something foolish or careless, let the mountain take me. But you gave me a reason to live carefully, to value my life because it was connected to yours." "We gave each other reasons," Clara said. The same words she had spoken years ago in the cabin. "That is how love works. That is how partnership works. We build each other up. We make each other better. We face the world together and it becomes manageable because we do not face it alone." The party continued around them, their children and grandchildren and friends celebrating their love. But Clara and Jacob stood apart, locked in their own private moment. He kissed her temple, soft and sweet, and she felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt on their wedding night 25 years ago. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. You are my heart, Clara Bridger. You always have been. You always will be. I love you too. Forever and always, my mountain man, my protector, my partner, my love." The years continued to pass, as years do. They moved through middle age into their elder years with grace, their love deepening and mellowing like good wine. Jacob's knees finally gave out completely, forcing him to use a cane, but he never lost his strength or his protective nature, still watching over Clara and their growing family with fierce devotion. Clara's hair went white, her face creased with lines earned through decades of laughter and worry and life well lived. They spent more time now in quiet pursuits, sitting on their porch watching grandchildren play, tending their garden together, taking slow walks through their property. Jacob still fished occasionally, though he could not go as far as he once had, and he still smoked his catch, still hung rabbits and venison in the smokehouse behind their home. And every single evening, without fail, he filled Clara's plate first before taking any food for himself, the gesture so ingrained after decades of marriage that he did it without thought. But Clara noticed. She always noticed. And it still made her throat tight, still reminded her of that first night in his cabin when he had shown her, through that simple act of service, that she mattered to him, that she was precious, that she was cared for. On a summer evening in 1905, 30 years after they had spoken their wedding vows, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. Their youngest daughter had just left after Sunday dinner with her family, and the house was quiet again, just the two of them as it had been in the beginning. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if I had not stumbled into your clearing that day?" Clara asked, her hand in Jacob's. "Sometimes. I think I would have stayed on that mountain until I died. I think I would have convinced myself I was content with solitude, would have told myself I did not need anyone or anything beyond my daily routines. And I would have been lying to myself, but I would not have known it, because I would have had nothing to compare it to. No, Clara, the life I would have lived without you is not worth thinking about, because it would not have been a life. It would have been just existence, going through motions without purpose or joy or love." "I think I would have died," Clara said quietly. "If you had turned me away, if you had not taken me in and protected me, Holt's men would have found me within hours. I would be buried on that mountain, another unmarked grave, another person who disappeared in the West and was never heard from again. You saved my life that day in the most literal sense possible. And you saved mine in every sense that matters. We are even, I think. Or maybe we are both so far in each other's debt that the only way to pay it off is to keep loving each other until we draw our last breaths." Clara leaned into him, felt the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I can live with that arrangement." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the peaks, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. Down the road, a dog barked. Life went on around them, ordinary and precious, exactly as it should be. "I am glad I found you," Clara whispered into the twilight. "I am glad you took me in. I am glad for every single day we have had together, the good ones and the hard ones and all the ordinary ones in between. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Jacob Bridger. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Bridger. Thank you for stumbling into my clearing 30 years ago. Thank you for trusting me to keep you safe. Thank you for loving me and building this life with me and giving me more than I ever dreamed I could have. I am grateful for you every single day." They stayed on the porch until full dark, holding hands and watching the stars emerge. Two people who had found each other in desperate circumstances and built something beautiful from that foundation of fear and kindness and love. Behind them, their house stood solid and warm, filled with the memories of decades and the promise of years still to come. Before them, the mountains rose, eternal and unchanging, silent witnesses to their love story. And in the years that followed, Jacob continued to gut fish and smoke meat when he was able, continued to fill Clara's plate first every evening without fail, continued to show her through action as much as words that she was cherished and treasured and loved beyond measure. And Clara continued to build their life and their legacy, continued to love him with a fierceness that never dimmed, continued to thank whatever force of fate or fortune had driven her into his clearing on that desperate day so long ago. They lived to see their children grown and successful, their grandchildren having children of their own. They lived to celebrate 50 years of marriage, surrounded by 3 generations of family who existed because a terrified woman had stumbled into a mountain clearing and a lonely man had chosen to help her. They lived long enough to see the old century turn into a new one, to watch the world change and modernize around them while their love remained constant and true. And when they finally passed, Jacob first and Clara following less than a year later, because she could not imagine a world without him in it, they left behind a legacy of love and family, and the simple, powerful truth that kindness matters, that protection offered to a stranger can change everything, that the smallest gestures of care, repeated day after day for decades, can build something stronger than mountains and more enduring than stone. Their story lived on in their children and grandchildren, passed down through generations, the tale of the mountain man who gutted fish and smoked meat all day, and then always set her plate first every evening, showing through that simple act that love is not just grand gestures, but daily choices, small kindnesses repeated until they become the foundation on which entire lives are built. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.